On a summer afternoon in 1969, a 6-year-old boy disappeared in a U.S. national park. Hundreds of people searched for him. The U.S. military was involved. No body was ever found. His name was Dennis Martin. And this is one of the most unexplained disappearances in American history. Dennis Lloyd Martin was a 6-year-old boy from Knoxville, Tennessee. In June 1969, he and his family planned a simple summer outing to Great Smoky Mountains National Park, one of the most visited national parks in the United States. There was nothing unusual about the trip. It was meant to be an ordinary family hike. Dennis was described as energetic, curious, and adventurous. He enjoyed being outdoors and was comfortable walking trails with adults. On the day he disappeared, he was with his father, grandfather, and several other family members. The group included adults and children moving together through the park. The area they visited was not remote wilderness. It was a popular section of the park, accessible by trail and frequently used by visitors. Visibility varied due to dense forest, but this was not an isolated backcountry expedition. The family had no reason to believe the environment was dangerous. Dennis was wearing a bright red shirt, making him relatively easy to spot. He was healthy, experienced with outdoor walks, and not known to wander far from adults. There were no reports of distress, conflict, or unusual behavior prior to his disappearance. At one point during the hike, Dennis and 2 other boys planned to hide behind trees and surprise the adults as they walked past. It was a harmless game, typical of children in outdoor settings. The adults continued along the trail, expecting the boys to follow moments later. Only Dennis did not reappear. Within minutes, family members realized something was wrong. They searched the immediate area, calling his name and checking nearby paths. There was no response. The assumption at first was that he had wandered slightly off trail or was hiding longer than expected. As minutes turned into hours, concern escalated rapidly. Park rangers were notified, and what began as a missing child report quickly became a full-scale emergency. Dennis Martin had vanished without a sound, without witnesses, and without leaving any clear trace behind. His disappearance would soon become one of the most extensive search operations in the history of the National Park Service, and one of the most enduring unsolved cases involving a child in an American national park. The disappearance of Dennis Martin occurred on June 14, 1969, during the early afternoon. The weather was warm, but not extreme. Conditions were considered suitable for hiking. There were no storms, no sudden environmental changes, and no immediate hazards reported in the area. The family group was moving at a relaxed pace along a forested trail. Visibility varied depending on the density of trees, but this was not a cliffside or dangerous terrain. The decision for the children to briefly hide and surprise the adults was spontaneous and harmless. According to family accounts, Dennis was last seen moments before he vanished. There was no scream, no sound of distress, and no indication of struggle. He simply did not return. When Dennis failed to rejoin the group, adults immediately began searching the surrounding area. They checked behind trees, nearby clearings, and side paths. His name was called repeatedly. The lack of response was alarming. Park rangers were contacted within a short period. The urgency of the situation was immediately recognized due to Dennis's age. Rangers began coordinating a search while family members continued looking on their own. As the afternoon progressed, additional personnel were brought in. Searchers expanded outward from the last known location, checking trails, ravines, and forested slopes. Despite the growing number of people involved, no physical evidence was found. There were no footprints that could be reliably identified as Dennis's. No clothing, no personal items, and no signs of a fall or injury were discovered. The terrain was searched carefully, but the forest floor yielded nothing. By evening, the scope of the search increased dramatically. What had started as a localized effort became a coordinated operation involving multiple agencies. The realization set in that Dennis had not simply wandered a short distance away. The absence of evidence on the first day was deeply troubling. In most missing child cases, some trace is found early: a footprint, a dropped item, or a witness report. In this case, there was nothing. As darkness fell, search efforts continued under difficult conditions. Helicopters, ground teams, and tracking dogs were prepared for expanded operations the following day. Dennis Martin had disappeared in plain sight, and the search was only beginning. The search for Dennis Martin quickly became one of the largest and most complex operations ever conducted in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Over the following days, hundreds of people were involved, including park rangers, volunteers, law enforcement, and military personnel. Search teams were organized into systematic grids covering miles of terrain. Helicopters were deployed to scan from above. Tracking dogs were brought in to detect scent, though dense forest and weather conditions complicated their effectiveness. The U.S. Army was eventually involved, providing manpower and logistical support. This level of response reflected the seriousness of the situation and the belief that Dennis might still be alive. Searchers examined ravines, creeks, steep slopes, and dense undergrowth. Areas were revisited multiple times. Despite the exhaustive nature of the effort, no conclusive evidence was found. At one point, an unrelated incident added confusion. A man nearby reported seeing a rough-looking individual carrying something over his shoulder. This report triggered an additional investigation, but it did not lead to any confirmed connection to Dennis's disappearance. As days passed, hope gradually diminished. Survival odds decrease significantly when a child is missing for extended periods in wilderness conditions. Yet the absence of any remains or belongings kept the case open-ended. The search continued for weeks, then months, but eventually active operations were scaled back. Officials concluded that Dennis was no longer alive, despite having no physical proof. What made the case particularly difficult was not just the lack of evidence, but the scale of the search. Areas were covered thoroughly, repeatedly, and by trained professionals. The idea that a child could completely vanish under such scrutiny was difficult to accept. Even after official searches ended, questions remained. Families, investigators, and park officials were left without answers and without closure. One of the most striking aspects of the Dennis Martin case is what was not found. No clothing, no shoes, no remains, no confirmed tracks, no physical evidence that could explain what happened. In wilderness disappearances, even when outcomes are tragic, something is usually discovered. Clothing becomes snagged, bones surface, personal items are located. In this case, there was nothing. Various explanations were considered. Accidental injury, animal attack, exposure, and disorientation were all evaluated. However, each theory faced the same problem: a total lack of physical confirmation. The terrain was challenging but not extreme. Dennis was not near a cliff edge or fast-moving water. The idea that he fell into an unrecoverable location was examined, but repeated searches yielded no evidence. Animal predation was also considered, but experts noted that such incidents typically leave trace evidence. None was found. Over time, the case remained officially unsolved. Authorities did not endorse a single explanation. The conclusion was limited to acknowledging that Dennis disappeared under unknown circumstances. For the family, the absence of answers was devastating. Without evidence, there could be no certainty, only possibilities. The case became a reference point in discussions about safety in national parks, child supervision, and the unpredictability of wilderness environments. It also highlighted the limitations of even the most extensive search efforts. Dennis Martin did not leave behind clues. His disappearance challenged assumptions about how much control humans have over even familiar outdoor spaces. More than 5 decades later, the disappearance of Dennis Martin continues to be discussed. Not because of speculation, but because of what it reveals about uncertainty, risk, and the limits of investigation. This case shows how quickly ordinary situations can turn irreversible. A family hike became a lifelong, unanswered question. A momentary separation resulted in a disappearance that defied explanation. It also demonstrates the limits of systems designed to protect people. Despite rapid response, massive resources, and expert involvement, the outcome did not change. Some events remain beyond resolution. The Dennis Martin case has influenced how national parks approach missing persons, search coordination, and public safety messaging. Procedures were reviewed, training improved, awareness increased. Yet the core mystery remains. For many, the case is a reminder that nature does not always provide answers. Wilderness environments are vast, complex, and indifferent to human expectation. Even well-managed spaces can conceal events permanently. Dennis Martin's disappearance is not a story of fear or legend. It is a documented historical case with verified facts and unresolved conclusions. It matters because it happened, and because it could happen again. Understanding this case is not about finding closure. It is about recognizing uncertainty, respecting the power of environment, and acknowledging that not all questions receive answers. Dennis Martin vanished in a place designed for enjoyment and safety. That reality continues to resonate, quietly and without resolution.